Welcome to MLA's first sheep projections webinar for 2024. Today we will be discussing MLA's first sheep projections release of 2024. Thanks for all taking the time to attend. My name is Phoebe Johnson. I'll be your moderator today. I'm MLA's Insights Adoption Specialist, working with exporters and brand owners to understand global markets and identify opportunities for Australian red meat. The team presenting today, taking you through the February release of sheep industry projections, will be Steve Bignell, the Market Information Manager, Erin Lukey, MLA's Senior Market Information Analyst, Emily Tan, Market Information Analyst, and Tim Jackson, the team's Global Supply Analyst.
Hi, thanks, Phoebes. So I'm Steve Bignell, MLA's Market Information and NRS Manager. In my team, we're responsible for the supply, pricing and production insights right up until the processor. And in NLRS, we look after market reports, indicators and slaughter data. A bit about me. Originally, I'm from a sheep and cropping farm in Western Australia from the town of Coachna.
Hey guys, Erin Lukey here, Senior Market Information Analyst. I work on the domestic supply and price side of Steve's team. A bit about my background is grew up in Sydney, but I've worked in agriculture for most of my career, starting off in policy down in Canberra and then having a bit of time on a station up north before starting with MLA around 6 months ago.
Hey everyone, my name's Emily. I am the Market Information Analyst. I work with Steve and Erin, and I used to work at Woolworths in their category development team, and I pretty much did anything supermarkets related.
Hi, my name's Tim Jackson. I'm the team's Global Supply Analyst, and more or less what I do is look at what's happening in other countries in terms of flock dynamics or general kind of macroeconomic factors, and then try to work out what that's going to mean for demand for Australian red meat around the world.
Thanks, team. The team's contact details will be made available, and if you have any supply, price or production related inquiries, please reach out and we'll be happy to assist. Before we start, I'll cover a few housekeeping points regarding today's presentation. All participants will be on mute throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, there will be time allocated at the end of the presentation. Feel free to enter your questions at any time throughout via the Slido option by scanning the QR code on any of the slides, which will take you to the Slido platform. Please note this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be made available on MLA's website as well as via YouTube. The full projections document has been published on MLA's website under the Trends and Analysis page. Now we'll launch into the content and discuss the 2024 sheep projections. Starting with Steve, what are the top line figures for this year's sheep projections?
Thanks, Phoebe. So there are 4 key points from this release of the projections. The flock will shrink slightly from the 16-year high achieved in 2023. Lamb and sheep slaughter will rise, reaching record levels. Following this increase in slaughter rise, we will see production of lamb and sheep meat also hit record levels, and then we'll see carcass weights ease. Over the next hour, we're going to go through these key 4 points, as well as export, and pricing information.
Thanks, Steve. In the projections, you identified the importance of weather patterns in impacting the flock size. How will the weather patterns impact the sheep projections?
So weather, in particular rainfall, is a determining factor in flock size and production. In the period between 2020 and 2023, this was extremely evident when most parts of Australia, especially Southern Australia, experienced generally above average rainfall. For 3 to 4 consecutive seasons, this extensive rainfall led to the flock growing over 20%. In 2023, we also got an insight to the impact of forecast, not just actual weather. In 2023, forecast of dry conditions led producers to make decisions about whether or not to retain animals on farm. According to BOM, the 3-month forecast, rainfall is expected to be quite dry in Northern Australia, in parts of Northern Australia and in Southern Australia. What we do know around sheep regions, though, is that not the La Nina, El Nino, ENSO driver, but actually the Indian Ocean Diapole, which measures the temperature of waters in between Bali and Kenya, is actually the main driver of climatic conditions in major sheep growing regions. The IOD is expected to be neutral to slightly positive in 2024, which means that rainfall is expected to be average, if not just slightly a bit drier. Historic weather patterns indicate that in a 5-year period in Australia, generally one season is good, 2 seasons are average and 2 seasons are bad. So we've taken this into account in our model. Given that we've had 4 years of above average rainfall, 2024 is expected to be an average season in terms of precipitation. Our model predicts that 2025 and 2026 will be below average in terms of climate conditions. We know that some people are predicting a return of La Nina weather events in 2024. However, our model suggests an average year in 2024.
Thanks, Steve. We all understand the importance of rainfall in the sheep industry. What impact does temperature have on forecasts and the industry overall?
BOM's 3-month forecast from March to May is for Australia to be hotter than average. This is shown in the map here currently on the screen. However, we know that high temperatures, if accompanied by rainfall in times like spring, are actually conducive to good pasture growth. However, if high temperatures are forecast when the autumn feed gap is expected to occur, then we know that that will impact the amount of pasture available to producers. We do know that high temperatures will also reduce groundwater for stock and soil moisture as we move into the 2024 growing platform.
We saw an increase in market volatility, particularly at the end of 2023. How do you think this will impact the industry?
Market volatility in 2023 had a significant impact on producer confidence. We know that, and sentiment, which subsequently impacted prices. The intensity of market peaks and troughs depends on weather, confidence, and global macroeconomic factors. The trade lamb market experienced the most significant fall on record in 2023. There was a few points that influenced this price volatility in 2023 that were unique. So the flock reached 78.75 million head, the largest since 2007. Coming into 2023, also, the forecasts were showing an unfavourable season, possibly causing producers to reduce the number of animals they had on hand. And this obviously impacted producers' confidence and intention. Our producer intention survey showed that producer sentiment fell in 2023 by 109 points from positive 60 to below negative 40. This low sentiment will impact the industry and has impacted producers' plans for 2024 numbers.
Inflation reached its peak in December 2022 at 7.8% and has been easing steadily since and continues to hover slightly above the target range of 2 to 3%. How does this impact the sheep industry in 2024?
Inflation pressures continue to impact producer decision making. Inflation in December was 4.1%, indicating that costs of inputs remain high, and this is exacerbated by the low AUD exchange rate. Key inputs for farmers include fertiliser, fuel, chemicals, vet and animal products, and shearing costs. Services inflation is higher than goods inflation at the moment. So that means that it was going to have an impact on industries that are very labour intensive, such as the sheep meat industry. We know that there is an exposure of the sheep meat industry to high labour costs, given the nature of the industry and the reliance on shearing and crutching costs.
Labour is costly. Are there other labour considerations the industry is dealing with?
So not only the cost of shearing increasing and the likes, but getting access to shearers and wool classes is critical to the sheep meat and wool industry. A shrinking labour pool of shearers and increasing shearing rates have made sheep farming difficult at times in recent history. The price producers are receiving for wool and the availability of shearers may see shifts in the sheep demographic over time.
Steve, you mentioned the sheep demographic. Are there any changes in the flock makeup that you're expecting to see?
We've seen a shift towards meat breeds in the last few years. The result, and this has been the result of lamb prices, changes in wool prices, and difficulty accessing shearers. As a result of this, we have seen a change in flock demographics, most notably in WA. We expect this trend to continue, and this is reinforced in SPIS results. Other things that will impact producer decision making will be the allocation of land towards cropping, and that will be impacted by the returns of growing different crops.
So, Erin, I'll come to you now. Steve touched on some of the macro assumptions that supported the development of the projections. We know the Sheep Producer Intention Survey is a really important tool for MLA and the broader industry. Did the survey results also support these findings?
You're definitely right there. So for those who don't know, the Sheep Producer Intention Survey is a joint survey conducted by MLA and also Australian Wool Innovation. So we run this survey 3 times a year. It focuses around gathering data on 3 sort of areas. So these are flock demographics, which Steve touched on just earlier, producer intentions, so that forward-looking intentions around growth or decline, and then also producer sentiment. So how producers are feeling about the sheep meat and the wool sectors individually. It's a really useful tool for understanding the current flock, and then also gives us a strong idea on the direction the industry participants are heading, meaning it does play a strong role in our projections process. So on the screen, we're looking at the producer sentiment. So these results are from our October wave. Those results showed a pretty strong decline in industry sentiment in the sheep meat sector, moving from positive 67 to negative 42 over the 12 months, which was a change of 109 points. Queensland was the only state that remained positive, and then the biggest fall was seen in South Australia. So then when we look at the wool industry, they also saw a sentiment hit of 28 points to negative 15. This negative outlook also was reflected in producer intentions, where we saw 44% of producers were intending to reduce the size of their flocks, with many citing prices and the market volatility as a reason for this. It's worth noting that these survey results were gathered in October last year, when the market was significantly lower on the East Coast than what it is today, which is where a lot of those sheep producers are. So we're watching really closely the next survey wave, which will be in April of this year, to see where there has been a shift. We do expect sentiment to be a bit higher than what it was in October last year. With that said, though, decisions made over that period will have a pretty big impact on flock size, which is one of the reasons we're forecasting a drop in sheep numbers.
With that in mind, Erin, can you explain how you expect the flock to perform out to 2026?
Sure, Phoebe. So last year we witnessed the Australian flock reach its highest size that had been in over 15 years at 78.75 million head. This was driven mostly by an intensive weather-induced restocking period from 2020 to 2022, post that drought period in 2027. So over the last 12 months, the concerns around an easing market, dry conditions paired with the natural maturing of the flock over that rebuild period, elevated turnoff of unproductive and older breeding animals, and as producers were turning a bit more conservative about their flock. This higher turnoff will lead to a slightly smaller lamb crop in 2024 and an overall reduction in the flock this year and next. So looking in numbers terms, the flock is forecast to ease by 2.9% by June this year, reaching 76.5 million head. And then we're expecting a further reduction into 2025 to 74 million head, and then a small lift of under 1% to 74.5 million in 2026. So this just follows that similar pattern that we've seen over the last few decades. So although the flock is expected to shrink in 2024 and 2025, we're not foreseeing it to be a substantial destocking phase, and the flock will remain above that 10-year long-term average.
Thanks so much, Erin. I'll move on to you, Emily. I understand the flock in 2024 is expected to ease slightly compared to 2023. How will that impact lamb slaughter over the forecast period?
Yeah, so thanks, Phoebe. Over the forecasted period, slaughter is expected to reach 26.1 million head, beating the previous record set in 2023 by about 4%. In 2025 and 2026, lamb slaughter is forecast is 24.9 million head and 24.4 million head, respectively, a reduction of 4.6% and 1.7%. When looking back to 2023, we saw lamb slaughter reach record levels, hitting nearly 25 million head. The lamb slaughter in 2023 nearly reached 2 million head, or 11% above the previous record of 23 million head achieved in 2016. The NRLS slaughter for the start of 2024 is currently running well ahead of the numbers in early 2023, reinforcing that the 26 million slaughter figure is achievable, and we are tracking very well to hit our forecast. So going forward, the change in demographics in the flock towards meat breeds and an increased producer focus on prime lamb production means that Australia will be able to have a higher lamb slaughter with the same size flock.
That is a lot of lamb being slaughtered in 2024. What's the outlook for sheep slaughter, Em?
So sheep slaughter in 2024 is forecast to reach 10.1 million head, which is the largest annual sheep slaughter since 2007. This record of slaughter was driven by the ongoing turnoff of older breeding ewes that drove the rebuild and thus resulting in higher sheep slaughter throughout the year. In 2025 and 2026, sheep slaughter is forecast to reach 9.3 million head and 8 million head respectively, a reduction of 7.8% and 14.2% respectively as the flock demographic stabilizes.
As you mentioned, sheep and lamb slaughter will reach record levels this year. How do you think this will impact carcass weights over the next 3 years?
So with slaughter reaching record levels, lamb carcass weights are expected to ease by 0.3 kilograms to 23.8 kilograms in 2024. In 2025, lamb carcass weights will shrink to 23.6 kilograms, bouncing back to 24.8 kilograms in 2026. So sheep carcass weights are also estimated to ease to 25.1 kilograms in 2024 and continue to ease to 24.6 kilograms in 2025. Carcass weights will also increase in 2026 to 25.8 kilograms. So in the sheep producers intention survey, this shows that prime lambs have made up 30% of the flock, with meat breeds generally continuing to rise as a percentage of the flock overall. This, alongside with continued investment in genetics from producers, has led to a sustained lift in carcass weights, even when considering the changes in seasonal conditions. So as such, even though carcass weights are expected to ease slightly over the next few years, they will continue to remain above the long-term average.
Emily, you mentioned increased lamb and sheep slaughter and declining carcass weights. How will this impact production for the sheep meat industry this year?
So Phoebe, you make a really great point. Lamb production is set to break a new record in 2024, beating the previous record in 2023. This will be achieved because of record slaughter and relatively strong carcass weights. So lamb slaughter is expected to reach 621,000 tons in 2024, a 3.6% increase in 2023 levels. In 2025, lamb production forecast is set to ease from 2024 volumes to 587,000 tons and then rise again in 2026 to be just above 600,000 tons. This will be achieved through really strong carcass weights. So in 2024, mutton production will be the largest since 2006. We forecast to produce 254,000 tons of mutton this year, which is up by 3.3%. So as fewer ewes are being turned off in 2025 and 2026, we are forecasting 229,000 tons and 207,000 tons of mutton production respectively. So as the industry is moving towards a transitional period that Erin had previously mentioned, where production will stabilize as the industry enters a more average season.
Thanks, Emily. Before I move on to Tim, just a reminder that if you have any questions, please use the QR code you can see on the screen to access the Slido app. This is where your questions are being shown to the team. I'll now direct this question to Tim Jackson, our global supply analyst. Tim, can you explain to us what the outlook for the live export industry looks like over the next few years?
Thanks, Phoebe. So in 2023, live sheep exports lifted 22% from historically low numbers in 22 to 612,000 head. Strong demand in key Middle Eastern markets was the main driver of this increase, alongside a decline in sheep prices. And we expect that demand will continue to rise in 2024. In particular, the first live sheep exports to Saudi Arabia in over a decade late last year can be considered a signal of the rising demand for protein in Middle Eastern markets, as well as a considerable demand driver in its own right. With that said, there are some geopolitical headwinds currently affecting the trade, but the underlying dynamic in the flock looks fairly positive for the forecast period. While we do take things like conflict and international relations into account when formulating our projections, we don't try to forecast them. So the general forecast is largely based on supply in Australia and demand in export markets, both of which point to strong lifts in live export volumes.
In 2023, we saw that livestock prices were extremely volatile. Prices have rebounded since then. With that in mind, projections is an opportunity for MLA to see what top industry analysts are forecasting for prices over the next 6 months. Steve, can you elaborate on what these analysts see happening to the trade lamb and heavy lamb indicators?
Thanks, Phoebe. So as stated, MLA doesn't do price forecast itself. What we do in both our cattle and sheep projections is we go out to top industry analysts and aggregate their price forecast within 90% confidence interval. And for sheep, we get them to do that for both their heavy lamb and trade lamb indicators. The analysts that we go out to are there listed at the bottom of that slide, and they are Rabobank, ABARES, Episode 3, Mercado, and Rural Bank. We ask them to forecast the price of the indicators out to 6 months. So these indicator forecasts are where the analysts see the indicator sitting at 30 June 2024. The aggregated heavy lamb indicator forecast from the analyst is set to reach 763 cents per kilo carcass weight. This is 19% above current prices. The upper limit of where analysts see the trade lamb reaching is 854 cents per kilo carcass weight. And that is also up on where the current price is sitting. We'll go towards and look at the heavy lamb indicator. The heavy lamb indicator, the analysts have the forecast sitting at 763 cents per kilo carcass weight, 19% above current prices, and the trade, and they have the upper echelon of that at 877 cents per kilo carcass weight. So well up on where the prices are currently sitting. The analysts have provided some commentary on why they see their forecast reaching these levels, and the main driver is that they predict a bit of a better season in terms of seasonal conditions, and they expect that processing capacity will be able to process the supply of animals when they come onto the market.
Thanks for that, Steve. Now we've covered the domestic environment, I'll cross back to you, Tim. Have you heard, we've heard production is expected to lift, but where will this extra production go?
So a fair amount of the additional production will be consumed in Australia. In 2023, we saw domestic consumption rise by 13% to over 190,000 tonnes, which is the highest domestic consumption figure we've seen since 2018. We expect this trend to continue in 2024, with domestic consumption expected to lift to 230,000 tonnes. Australian consumers are familiar with lamb and like it. Increased production has given consumers an opportunity to eat more, and we expect that this will lead to an increase in domestic consumption. Outside of the domestic market, we expect total sheep meat exports to lift in 2024 to 607,000 tonnes in carcass weight terms. This would be the largest amount of sheep meat exported by Australia on record, beating out the previous record set last year.
That's quite a few containers, Tim. Given the increase in production and exports, what's the economic outlook for lamb and mutton within our export markets?
So looking at the outlook in our key markets, there's not tension in the figures, where incomes are rising in real terms, but consumer confidence is a bit weaker than you might expect. In real terms, incomes in the United States have lifted 10% since 2019, while consumer confidence is actually negative. The difference is more stark in China, where real incomes have lifted by almost 20%, but sentiment is very low compared to the historic trend. Luckily, exports and consumption tend to track income better than sentiment. Exports have been rising consistently in 2024, and February was actually the biggest month for sheep meat exports on record, which is a bit surprising given our records usually peak around November. Export prices have been looking quite good, and demand is solid in our key markets, so we are reasonably set up on the fundamentals.
Looking across the ditch, New Zealand is our key competitor in the sheep meat export space. Can you explain their flocks dynamic and what this means for Australia?
So in the next year, production from New Zealand can be expected to rise slightly, which will mostly be reflected in increased export volumes. The spring lamb crop in New Zealand was about 2.6% larger in 2023 than 22, which will translate to higher slaughter numbers, higher production, and ultimately a lift in exports. In the longer term, structural changes to New Zealand's primary production sector are likely to continue impacting lamb and mutton production, and production is likely to fall. changes in land use away from prime land production to either dairying, forestry, or urban housing have been ongoing for decades and have put downward pressure on flock numbers. This has meant that slaughter has steadily declined over time. Exports generally held up over this period, as most of the decrease in slaughter manifested in a decreased domestic consumption. But that has now dropped to a low enough level that future decreases in production will be directly borne out in export markets.
Thank you so much, Tim. With that, I think we'll move on to see if we have any questions. So if you haven't already, please scan the QR code and you can send your questions directly to the team. Thank you. So we have one question here, which I think I'll pass to Tim. How will USA beef production impact the Australian lamb outlook?
Thanks, Phoebe. So broadly, what the US beef production outlook is going to do is increase demand for proteins in kind of international trade in general. So to the extent that it has an effect, and we think it will, it'll drive up demand for Australian red meat more broadly. It'll drive up demand for Australian lamb. That's going to be particularly true in the United States, where the decrease in beef production will then mean that demand for alternate proteins is likely to lift. But it's also then going to have an effect in East Asian markets, which import quite a large percentage of their total protein consumption. And say in 2019, we saw a large decrease in Chinese hog production, and that then in turn led to increased demand across all types of proteins. So likely the forecast decrease in American beef production and forecast decrease in exports in particular is going to have an effect in the United States and in East Asian markets in terms of supporting demand for protein generally. That's going to manifest in firmer demand for sheep and mutton exports than we would have otherwise seen.
Thanks, Tim. Another one's come in here. Has the timing of lamb slaughter changed in recent years? I might throw that one to you, Erin.
I can also help out if you is
Or Steve, anyone who wants to answer this.
with the timing of lamb slaughter, we have actually seen it move from the back end of the calendar year, and the lambs are being held over into early summer, late summer, early autumn for sale. What we saw in 2022 into 2023 was obviously there was some of the flood and rain impacts in Victoria, which actually meant that lambs weren't reaching processor weight, so they were held back and sold in the 2023 year because the producers needed more time to add finish to those animals. We saw as a result of that sort of impacted the supply chain and the usual seasonal peaks and troughs we would have expected, and meant that sort of lamb slaughter got pushed back consistently last year. And it's a trend we've also seen in our SPIS, our sheep producer intention survey that Erin looks after, that will be released later this month. It shows that producers expected to sell expectation for sales in December were lower than they expected, and those lambs that they expected to sell in December and November will flow through and be sold in January and February. So we definitely have seen lambs being held back and being slaughtered later.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Another question we have in here is, can processors meet the increase in lamb supply?
We've had lamb. We heard Em talk about lamb slaughter hitting a record in 2023, nearly 25 million, which was over 10% above the previous record, or 2 million head. So last year in 2023, we hit absolutely astonishing lamb throughput and production levels. And so with that in mind, we definitely do know, it's important to mention that during lamb slaughter increasing, we also saw mutton slaughter increase. So we do know that those sort of small stock processing plants are able to deal with a huge increase in supply last year, and we do expect that they can track on and hit the 26 million that we're forecasting, and the current run rate based on current NLRS voluntary slaughter would indicate that they are currently on track to hit that. What will impact will be the lamb crop of 2024 and how many of them come to market in the late part of this year.
Great, thanks, Steve. We'll just see if there are any more questions coming through. Just a reminder, you can click that, scan the QR code to put through any questions you have for the team here. All right, if we have no further questions, we may draw that to a close. You can still enter questions in that Slido function at the conclusion of this webinar. And while the team haven't been able to answer them online today, we can definitely follow those up for you. So we'd like to thank everyone for their time and their participation today. Erin, you've got some interesting information about the producer intention survey.
Yes, so I spoke about the sheep producer intention survey earlier, and it's been brought up a few times. It's a really useful tool for us and then also industry to go into and have a look at where producers' heads are at, where the flock's moving. Yeah, it's just really quite useful. Our pulse wave of the survey, so the release of the pulse data will be next week. And then we also have a new wave of the survey coming out in April. So please look out for that. There'll be banners on our website. And again, it is integral to what we do and really, really good information for us. So
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. That brings the MLA Sheep Projections webinar to a close, presented by the Market Information team. Thank you again for your time today, and thank you especially to Steve, Erin, Emily, and Tim for all your contributions. Please provide us with your feedback as you leave the webinar. We'd like to continue to use webinars to share our insights, and your feedback will help shape the future of these events. As outlined at the beginning, a recording of this will be made available shortly, and a PDF of the slide deck will also be made available upon request. If your questions were not answered today, please touch base and discuss them with us offline. Don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions on supply and price related information or data. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.